You've turned this into a business.
Yes.
And I have learned that behind every successful woman that I meet, there is a backstory.
I was shouting, I was screaming, I was full of rage, full of anger, full of resentment, and just blaming everyone and everything around me. I was sitting in my living room and I had my two girls. One was 2 and I had a newborn, and I was broken. I knew what I was doing to my kids. I knew what I was doing to myself, but ultimately I didn't know who I was. And in that moment, I think I made the decision that changed my life, because it was either, Maryam, okay, you carry on this way, you carry on destroying your girls, you carry on destroying yourself and your marriage, or you make a decision to help yourself. Something I wish that someone told me was, you can be everything that you've never received.
I am here with Maryam Javaid, a certified Muslim parenting coach and public speaker, and the founder of Black and Brown Parenting. She's featured in TV, radio, magazines, and podcasts, and brings a wealth of knowledge and is the voice behind the much-needed conversations to be had amongst ethnic and diverse households when it comes to parenting. Assalamu alaikum, how are you?
Wa alaikum assalam. Alhamdulillah, I'm very good. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Super excited to explore this conversation with you.
Thank you for inviting me. I can't wait to begin, inshallah.
I'm going to start by asking you a question that I ask everybody that comes on this podcast, which is, who are you?
Oh, love that question.
No titles. I don't want to know what position you are in your family. I don't want to know what you do. Who is Maryam?
Maryam she's a carer. She nurtures, but most of all, she does pretty much everything against the grain. I think I'm definitely known for that.
I love that. I love that. And do you feel you really know yourself right now? Because I feel like it's a journey when you get to know yourself.
I think I'm very much still on that journey, but I know myself more now than I have ever done before. Subhanallah. And what a crazy journey it has been.
And what do you do?
I help and I work with ethnic families to help them to really create those loving homes by unlearning a lot of cultural nuances or cultural patterns that are holding them back.
Because you've turned this into a business.
Yes.
And I have learned that behind every successful woman that I meet, there is a backstory.
For sure.
There is a reason why, and it's that reason why that has given them the strength to not give up and to push through when the majority of people would quit. Where did this start for you? What was your journey like? Like, at what point can you look back and say, right, this is why I'm doing what I do?
It started from childhood. Ultimately, it was the experiences that I had in my upbringing and how that shaped who I was and who I became, only to realize that that's actually not me. And I was just a product of the experiences in the environment at that time, subhanallah. And unearthing that and dismantling all of that started my journey of, well, who is Maryam? And what does she actually want?
And what was that like for you? Like, in what way?
That was scary, but liberating at the same time, because I was doing it on my own. And to be in a position where you don't know who you are, when you get to that point, well, who am I? You know, in this social media day and age that we're in, there's labels of, just be yourself, be your authentic self. I didn't know who I was.
Why?
I guess it comes down to being told who you are.
In what way? Like, I want to open that up because I feel like right now the people you work with are potentially in that position.
Absolutely.
So what were the things that happened for you that maybe influenced who you thought you were?
So there was a lot of cultural pressure that comes from parents, a lot of cultural pressure, a lot of, you have to this is a path of success and you must stick to this path because that's safe. It's because what we did and that's what you must do. So it was a lot of that. It was a lot of societal pressure, but ultimately I think it boils down to, for anyone I think that generally has immigrant parents, it is, this is our path. This is our way of success. This is what we want for you.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's no choice and there's no your own decisions and your own choices and what actually do you want.
Do you think that the cause of that at that point comes from the generation that they lived through? Like having opportunities wasn't always as prevalent. Like there wasn't always the luxury of choice of what opportunities you had. So this next generation came along, which is then your generation.
Yes.
And they're like, well, you have this option, so you must follow this route. Like, what do you think was the cause for their style of parenting?
So I talk on this quite a lot. And it boils down to a lot of generational trauma. If you just look at the history. So I always say that if you look at a lot of immigrant families or just ethnic diverse communities, you will always see that what success is for them is very much tied to survival, which is why we have, become that doctor and become that lawyer and become all of this, because actually that's what's going to put a roof over your head. That's what's going to put food on the table, subhanAllah. And I accept that. To even think about, well, actually, I'm not going to think about survival. I'm actually going to think, well, what's good for me and what's going to help me to thrive and be this best version of myself is such a privilege that, let's say, my parents didn't have or my grandparents didn't have. So I can definitely, in hindsight, now see how that can feel like a little bit of a threat to those that haven't had that opportunity.
Mm, absolutely. Can you identify what specific things happened that were a result of those pressures that they were putting on you?
I have a really funny story. So when I finished my GCSEs, alhamdulillah, I'm the eldest daughter. So I was quite academically inclined, alhamdulillah, compared to my siblings, and my parents still love to praise that. And I finished my GCSEs and my dad said to me, Maryam, you are going to do biology, you are going to do chemistry. And I said, Dad, I don't want to do it. I have no passion for it at all. You succumb to pressure, right? I ended up doing it. And what happened is I completely failed my first year of A-levels. And it was in that moment that I turned around to my dad and I said to him, and I couldn't say I told you so, because in our cultures, it's, you quite literally get into a lot of trouble saying that. And I remember having a meeting with our head teacher and it was so interesting because she turned around and she said, I see this quite a lot. She didn't directly say what she meant, but she goes, I see this quite a lot that, sometimes parents may steer you towards doing something else. And I came out of that. Alhamdulillah, I think my dad really saw what for what, and I then started pursuing humanities. I did history and alhamdulillah, I did very, very well. But that was just one of the causes. But I think if we're going back, it was very much not being able to be allowed to make your own decisions and your own choices and what are your interests and what do you like to do. There was none of that.
And it's so interesting because the women that I work with now, when I'm giving business mentorship, I have so many women that come to me and I'm like, so what do you do? And they are accountants, they're doctors, they're lawyers. And they're like, but this was never my choice.
Yes.
I never chose to do this. And I did it to make my parents proud.
Absolutely.
And they're now wanting to follow a route that is right for them. But still now, as adults, they're scared to tell their parents what they're doing until they become successful with it.
Yes.
Because they know it's just not going to be understood.
See, that's really interesting because for a long time, my parents were the same. Like if you ask my mom now, she'll still say, Maryam, you're so academically inclined. Go and pursue that PhD, become that lecturer. Just do it. Why are you not doing it? I think they have definitely come around now, alhamdulillah, seeing the success, alhamdulillah, that I'm having. But however, they were very, very worried. They were, you've done your university degree. Why are you not pursuing further? You've got the academic inclination. So even I've definitely felt that. And I think you just have to just get used to, I definitely had to get used to just not being understood. And even if that's from your parents, and that's not easy, it's definitely not easy.
And yours is a double whammy because not just have you gone against the grain and are doing something with having your own business, You're actually correcting people on the mistakes that your own parents made.
SubhanAllah, yeah. Yeah.
So take me back to you as a child. Like, what was your upbringing like?
Oh my goodness, that's such a heavy loaded question. Alhamdulillah, one thing I think that I definitely take with me as a mother today is the collectiveness. So my upbringing was very much involved my grandparents, my aunties, my uncles, my cousins. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I very much hold very dear and close to me. However, I think on the other end of the spectrum, the upbringing was very much, which I'm sure most people who have immigrant parents can relate to, in the sense there was a lot of pressure in all aspects. Pressure to achieve academically, pressure to behave a certain way, pressure to meet cultural standards, and pressure to just always keeping up your appearance as to what other people think of you.
Why do you think that was?
It's a cultural system. Ultimately, I think it boils down to it being a very cultural system. It's not just individual to every single family, because it's something that you see across all ethnicities. And ultimately, I think it's for parents, it's because they are judged themselves. Therefore, they feel they need to be harsher and clamp down on their children in order to maintain and protect that image.
Do you think they're trying to live their dreams through their children?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's so interesting you asked that question, because I remember confronting my dad and saying to him, and this was regarding one of my siblings, and I said to him, Dad, you can't live your life through your children, subhanAllah. And one day, because you think with immigrant parents, they won't say you're right. But one day I overheard him having a conversation with his friend, and he said, my daughter, it gives me goosebumps just talking about it, because it just...
I've got goosebumps listening to it.
Like my heart just burst. He said, my daughter, she tells me, we can't live our life through our children. And I think she's right. Our generation, we did do that. And sometimes I went through many thoughts of, will they ever change? Will they ever understand or come around to my way of thinking? And I had to make peace with the fact that I'm not in control of that. Mm-hmm. And I don't need to be. And if Allah wills, they will come round to a certain way of thinking. And now I see certain things. I see my mum do certain things and say certain things. And just one example that's coming to my mind that I shared most recently is my youngest. My mum asked her to do something, and she said, "No, I don't want to do it." And she made a face. And my mum said, it's okay if you don't want to do it. You can say no to me.
That's huge.
And that is huge, subhanAllah. And the unhealed version of me would probably stormed into the room and said, well, you didn't give us a choice. We never had a choice. And look what you're saying now. But alhamdulillah, it brings peace to my heart that through the way that I'm raising my children and the education that I'm giving to other parents, that there is a natural ripple effect somewhere, somehow, but it's not within my control, and that's okay.
And that's really important, you saying, and that's okay, because you need to be able to be okay with the fact that your parents may never fully understand your choices or your choices for raising your children. How did they react to you starting your own business?
There was a lot of fear. It was a lot of fear of, we have raised you a certain way. We pushed you to go, we encouraged you to go to university. So alhamdulillah, I come from a very well-educated family and my parents pride themselves on that, alhamdulillah. So for me not pursuing a master's or me not pursuing a PhD or not furthering myself after my degree, in their eyes, they were very worried. Mm-hmm. Because for them, it's very important. And I understand this completely for a woman to have more for herself, should she ever need it. And my mom is very big on that. So when I first started my business, they didn't understand, like, what is this that you're doing? They didn't understand how you use social media for those purposes. So what do? You just talk? Do you even get clients? I remember my dad asking me. And now, obviously, where I am now, alhamdulillah, he may not verbally say, I'm proud of you. But I remember I featured in a mainstream magazine and I said, Dad, can you go out and buy some copies? And he went out, I kid you not, at 6 p.m. to WH Smith just before it was going to close. And he bought 5 copies. And when I walked into the house, when I was visiting them, I saw him sitting there reading it.
How beautiful.
But do you know what's so interesting? He never once said, I'm so proud of you. But the fact that he sat there and he read it and he said, yeah, it was good. I said, what do you think, Dad? He goes, yeah, it was really good. And that was enough for me. Alhamdulillah, it was enough.
And it's a bit of a double whammy because you're not just running your own business. You are teaching other parents how not to make the mistakes that your parents made.
Yeah.
Have you had that conversation with your parents?
Yes, I have. And it's interesting because some of my mom's friends have actually said to her, oh, she's talking about you. She's talking about what you did, right? And I've had to have that conversation with my mom that, yes, Mom, like there were mistakes. And alhamdulillah, my mom it took her a while, but she understands that it's not a personal attack. We all make mistakes as parents. And actually, it's not something that's individual to my family or my parents. It's a cultural system that I'm challenging. So it's not that I'm challenging my parents. Mm-hmm. My dad, on the other side, isn't so much there yet. Inshallah, he will get there. But I think for him, it's more of, getting the younger generation to understand that there is a historical generational trauma background as to why they parented that way. Mm-hmm. And for our parents, they don't have the tools. Back then they didn't have the tools or the knowledge, and they actually did the best that they could with what they had at that particular time.
And I guess in a way, they weren't mistakes for them at the time.
Yes.
What may be mistakes now in this generation was actually them just wanting the best for you and possibly trying to live their dreams through you, but still in a protective way. In
hindsight, I see that it was love. It was all love.
Yeah.
In the best way they knew.
And how has their style of parenting impacted the way that you've chosen to parent your own children? Especially from the beginning.
Okay, so from the beginning, I repeated pretty much everything that I experienced, word for word.
Yeah.
And there was a time where I had to stop because my mom just came out of my mouth. There's that phrase. And it wasn't that, oh my gosh, I don't like my mom or she's this terrible person, but it was, why am I doing what was done to me? How have I got here?
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. Was there a moment where you decided, I don't want to do that anymore? I don't want to be like that anymore?
Yeah. And I vividly remember that moment. I was sitting in my living room and I had my 2 girls. One was 2 and I had a newborn, and I was broken. I knew what I was doing to my kids. I knew what I was doing to myself. But ultimately, I didn't know who I was. And I picked up my phone and I could see just this reflection of myself. And in that moment, I think I made the decision that changed my life. Because it was either, Maryam, okay, you carry on this way, you carry on destroying your girls, you carry on destroying yourself and your marriage, and you walk away from all of this, or you make a decision to help yourself.
And can I ask, what made you feel that way? What was happening for you to feel, I don't like the way I'm treating my girls, or I don't like the way I'm parenting?
I was shouting, I was screaming, I was full of rage, full of anger, full of resentment, and just blaming everyone and everything around me. I never took accountability or any responsibility for my behavior. And I just thought, is this life?
Mm-hmm.
Is this the way that life is going to be? Is this what it means to be a mum? And everyone around me, anyone that I sought advice from, friends and family, I didn't get the answers that I wanted. It was, well, this is just, we've all been through it. This is just how it is.
I think that's so important, because you do become like the people you surround yourself with. And I think it's absolutely okay to change your circle. There is no harm in that. In fact, it will benefit you, because I made the same mistake. I was 27 when I first kind of questioned, who am I? Like, why am I making actions? Why am I doing things that have no positive impact in my life and that are only going to hold me back in life?
Yes.
And I thought, right, I'm going to attempt to overcome my fear. Communication was a really big challenge for me. I'm going to try and overcome my fear, and I'm going to go and speak to somebody. But I chose the wrong person. I chose a friend that was in my circle. And I sat down and I was like, right, I think I've got a problem. And she was like, oh, right. Because I also always came across as the person that's always fine and the person that everybody brings their problems to. I never ask for help. Like, I'm just thriving in all that I do. But nobody had any idea what I was thinking in my mind, because I never took my problems to anybody else.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm going to try this. Everybody's happy to bring their problems to me. Let me take my problems to somebody. And I sat down and I was like, I think I've got a problem with communication. Like, I don't tell people what I'm really thinking, and then they misjudge me. And once they misjudge me, I then think that they're underestimating me. And then what happens is I build up all these reasons why they're wrong, but I don't tell them. And then I let it all explode in one thing. So I took it to her and I told her this, and she turned around and said to me, oh. And that was her response. She had nothing to say.
Yeah.
And that took me back another 5 years, because I was like, well, I'm not going to tell anyone my problems again.
Yeah.
I'm not speaking to somebody.
Yeah.
So in that moment of you sitting with yourself and questioning yourself, who am I? Is this who I want to be? What decision did you make?
I made a decision to get help. And that's something so alien to me, particularly as an eldest daughter. I was very much, I can do this all on my own, very hyper independent. I don't need any help. And actually, I was the one who most people came with their problems, be it friends, be it family, be it my own parents. You know, if anything went wrong at home, oh yeah, we'll just call up Maryam and, we'll just vent to her. And, I took on that role. I really took on that role, only to realize, well, who's looking after you? Who's listening to you? SubhanAllah. So for me to seek help was such a big step, even from a cultural perspective, because from my cultural background, we don't talk to people about our family issues, let alone personal issues, because that's embarrassing. You don't do that. You don't, what if someone knows you, and what if they tell someone else? It's a real conditioning that I had within me, but I knew it was either I lose all of this and I destroy the gifts that Allah has given me, or I make that choice to go against the grain once again and get help.
Do you think that you were trying to be your mum?
I was trying to be who my parents wanted me to be, to please them. Because that's what you want to do, right? You want to please them. You want to make them proud of you in the way that they tell you to or ask of you. And it's scary to go against that, because I think it's so ingrained in you as a child that you must do what your parents say, and you must, it's everything to make your parents proud. Every child wants that, right? But there comes a time where you have to choose what's best for you. And sometimes that's not what your parents think is best for you.
And this is so important. So I have children as well. I have 3 young children. And my husband is Algerian. So he had a lot of cultural things that he kind of brought to the table. I'm half English, half Italian. The cultural side on the British side is very harsh in a completely different way. There's no communication. So where you verbally heard the shouting, the you should be doing this, you need to live your life like this, there is so little communication that I had as a child that I figured everything out by myself. I was never shown any emotions. I've never heard the words, I love you. I was never given a hug.
Yes.
Like I clearly cried it out as a baby because I became attached to my blanket, my cot blanket. But do you think that when you're growing into an adult and when you kind of reach an age, and I feel like this happens where you do reach an age where you start questioning, who am I? Do you think it's difficult to then go back to your parents and say, do you know what, I'm struggling with this because of the way you raised me?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting you say that, because even till today, I've tried to have that conversation with a certain parent and they will say, well, it made you stronger. It made you who you are today. And alhamdulillah, you're doing amazing, you know? And that is the message, definitely from a cultural perspective. Well, I turned out fine. It made you stronger. It made you who you are. And actually, if you didn't have all of those things, you wouldn't be where you are today or who you are today. So in my journey, I learned that there's certain things that I can't, and I couldn't go to my parents with, because they will just take it as a personal attack. But it's not, it's just me trying to find myself. But for them, they never had that privilege. You know, even this concept of, what does that even mean? Finding yourself, that's such a privilege, subhanAllah, that a lot of our grandparents and parents they didn't have time to think about that. So I think I now understand that in hindsight, but as a young teenager or a young adult, I didn't understand. So I had nowhere to turn to. So yeah.
It's a concept of, what does it mean to be strong?
Yeah.
That's where the question lies, because, and I think as women, that's also a completely different conversation than what it is for boys. Do you have brothers?
I have one brother, yeah.
So the way in which boys are raised and the way in which girls are raised are two completely different conversations. Yeah. And I understand culturally, that's even more so. I'm an only child. So I have no siblings. So I've only ever known just, what it was like for me. I always wished I had siblings. But this concept of being strong quite often is, how capable are you of hiding your emotions?
Of keeping up the appearance. Do you know, I think culturally this is such a huge thing, and it's something that I think I'm still on that journey of really not caring about what people think. Mm-hmm. But for me growing up, it was, as long as everything looked the part on the outside, even if you're crumbling on the inside and you really don't want to do whatever it is you're doing, it doesn't matter, because you're keeping up that image. And we have this notion of, well, whatever you're doing or not doing is a reflection of your parents' upbringing.
And actually what you just said there is my idea of strength. I believe you become strong when you can genuinely not care what other people think about you.
Yeah.
So off the back of that, I think it takes a lot of strength for any parent to admit to themselves, firstly, that their choice in their style of parenting is harmful for their child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let alone admitting that to somebody else and putting their hands up and saying, I'm harming my child.
Yes.
How do you have that conversation and encourage women to be able to acknowledge it for themselves, but actually to open up about it?
It's in creating that safe space. And for me, I think throughout my business, what I found is, I think it's the core reason for Black and brown parenting, is there weren't any conversations surrounding the experience that you did have growing up with immigrant parents. There aren't that many conversations out there, open conversations where you can say, well, I was hit as a child and I was shouted at. And actually, that is something that I am doing with my children, and I don't want to do it anymore. Mm-hmm. Because it's easier to stay stuck in the familiar. And that's what I did for a very long time, to actually hold your hands up and say, oh my God, I'm doing it, instead of just blaming the kids and all your other external factors around you, which I did that for a very long time. Oh, it's because they stress me out, and because I don't have help, and I don't have this, and this is why I'm doing it. But actually, it wasn't. The reason was because I had these unhealthy patterns that I had carried with me. And it wasn't till I found a safe space where with all of this shame that I was carrying, that I could say, hey, this is what I'm doing.
I think that is my idea of weakness, is when you're so conscious of what other people think of you, that when you do make wrong choices and you make bad actions, that you're still capable of blaming other people.
Absolutely.
And if you can actually realize that's a weakness and I'm going to work on that, then every step, just acknowledging, let alone actually speaking to you or speaking to somebody else about it, is a step in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Do you have family outside of the UK?
I do, yeah.
Has this conversation got as far as has this conversation got as far as them? Like, have you had this conversation with them?
I haven't. No, I haven't.
Because I was just thinking, like, culturally, we're in the UK.
Yeah.
Okay. And there are a lot of influences anyway, Western influences. On styles of parenting, especially if you have children that go to school. So I know you homeschool your children, but a lot of parents out there do have their children going to school. How do you manage that conversation of, well, you're just being influenced by the Western society?
I love that question, because I've been told that before. And I always bring it back to, something that I always get told is, Maryam, this is new age stuff that you're bringing. And actually, the way that we did things is fine, because we all turned out fine, which we know that's not true. So I always bring it back to the Quran and the Sunnah. If we look and just read about the seerah and our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the way that he treated children, and there's so much around that. That's just my simple answer. That none of this is new. Everything that I'm saying is already in the Quran and the Sunnah. And actually, if you want to argue, a lot of the Western principles are from the Quran and the Sunnah. But we're very quick to take from that perspective instead of looking back at the Quran and the Sunnah. So I think that's the biggest comeback that you can probably have. But it's if the person is willing to actually accept that there is a big difference between what is culture and what is Islam. And I feel like in many of our homes, it's completely blurred.
I was really privileged, I would say, because as a revert to Islam, I learned Islam through the Quran, firstly, and secondly, through the Sunnah. So when I started to see any cultural practices, I was like, why are you doing that? Like, I'd question it. And me and my husband had quite a journey, because there were lots of cultural things that he was doing. Then I was questioning it, and he was like, actually, you're right. That's culture. That's not religion.
I love that, because something that I say to my clients is the very first step. It's, well, how do we go about uprooting this? You give yourself permission to question what has been normalized. And that alone, once you start giving yourself permission to, okay, so where did we just start this? Where did this come from? This idea or this belief come from? And that alone helps you to start dismantling and unraveling things. But if you don't give yourself that permission and just think, oh yeah, well, it's familiar and it's what my parents did and my grandparents did, then we're never going to be able to move away from that.
And it's really interesting that you said that people have approached you and said, Maryam, this is just new age stuff that you're doing. I have a theory that actually, because it's the same in business. Women are becoming entrepreneurs. Right? They're trying to be like men. This is new age stuff. This is signs of the end of times. Obviously, there are signs of the end of times. That's a whole different conversation. But actually, this new age stuff is actually just returning back to the original roots. So when it comes to parenting, or when it comes to women in business, we're just taking it back to where it was. Not actually the opposite, and people think that we're trying to be futuristic and we're trying to change the roles and the family structures and stuff like that. I think the opposite is happening. I think we're returning to the roots of Islam.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. Yeah.
Have you faced any backlash or resistance from your kind of community, your cultural community, for what it is that you're doing?
I think I would say yes, absolutely. I think more so from the elder generation, because they have a certain way of thinking and a certain way of doing things. And in their minds, it worked, right? It worked. And not just the elder generation actually saying this. I think even my own generation, where it's, well, actually shouting and hitting and screaming at your child, well, it actually works because it gets them to stop doing whatever they're doing.
Of course it does. Temporarily, but it doesn't teach them choice. Exactly. And I think something that I always like to keep in the forefront of my mind is, well, this parenting thing is bigger than you and I. It's bigger than this dunya. And actually, if we want to parent for the short term, then hey, let's carry on doing what we're doing. But if we want to parent from the long term and after this dunya, then surely we should be thinking about what method we're using and whether that's going to, inshallah, bring fruits, not just for this dunya, but also for the next. So something I'm very conscious of is, and this is based off what you just said about parenting for the short term, is that I can prevent my children from doing everything that I think is bad for them. But in doing that, I am not teaching them how to make the right decisions for themselves. So I can only parent my children whilst they're children.
Absolutely.
But one day they're going to become adults, inshallah, and they're going to go out into the world by themselves, and they're not going to know how to make the right decision, when to take risk. They're not going to know what to turn to or how to have any common sense or initiative. One of my clients that I've got at the moment is a former teacher. She's left teaching to set up her own business. And that's something I'm helping her with now. But she said it's so interesting that a lot of children that come from cultural and ethnic diverse backgrounds in classes have the best spelling, the best writing skills. They're fantastic at maths, but ask them to write a story and they have no creativity and they don't know how to think for themselves. No common sense and no initiative. And she says it's really scary because these children, and they are the ones that will go on to become accountants and in IT, where they don't need to think, it's all very structured. She's like, but when it comes to basic life skills, it's quite scary.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, because I can resonate with that, because I feel like only after getting married did I learn certain life skills. And again, bringing the conversation back to, in hindsight, I understand it was the protection, it was the love, but actually you are hindering your children from not giving them those opportunities to make decisions and show them how to take risks. And I think the critical thinking element and allowing them to, subhanAllah, it's something simple as having open communication, being allowed to have a different opinion to yours, being allowed to healthily have a disagreement. Those were all things that I did not experience. And I know majority of my clients didn't. So now naturally, when you become a mother, it does feel a little bit intimidating and threatening. And it's something that you have to learn that it's okay. And it's okay for you to have a different opinion to a friend, to a colleague, to your parent. It's okay. And that's something that I had to learn.
How has that impacted? No, actually, let me change this. Because you're married and you may make that decision for yourself that you want to change your parenting style. But this is a joint job. And I think it's a challenge that I see a lot and that I've been through as well, where you have different ideas of parenting styles. How do you navigate that?
Yeah. Okay. So this was a real struggle for me in the beginning. So I come from a mixed background, but predominantly it's South Asian, and my husband is West African. Those are two very, very heavy cultures and have very similar but different parenting styles. So when I was going through my own growth journey, naturally, you want to take your husband along with you. However, it's not always ideal where he understands. So I did have the typical, well, are we just going to spoil them then? Are we just going to give them whatever they want?
We don't need them to respect us.
No. Well, I can't manage this. Then you deal with it the best way that you know how, because apparently I'm just, subhanAllah. And it's only now slowly that he's understanding that actually it's okay to allow them to express their emotions, something as simple as that. And actually it's okay for me to talk about how I'm feeling, because men in general, the upbringing that they have, especially from a cultural perspective, it's be quiet, don't cry, man up, fix your face. Quite literally, these are the things they're told.
And then we expect those men to go on and have healthy relationships.
Exactly. Let alone raise children.
Let alone bring children into, it's very difficult. What role do you believe religion plays in shaping parenting practices, especially in the ethnic minority groups? Like, is it something that people can pull on more? Is there enough information Islamically out there to try and help smooth out the kind of cultural practices?
I don't believe there is. Actually, I was having a conversation at an event that I was at with a brother, and we were actually talking about how a lot of parents, when they have trouble with their young teenagers, they'll take them to the local mosque or to the local imam, and they'll say, oh, just read some more Quran and, just do this and do that. And I my personal opinion is I don't think a lot of imams and masajids are that equipped enough, especially with the world that we live in today and the outside influences and what our children are actually experiencing. I don't believe that they're fully equipped to manage that or give parents the correct guidance. So there's definitely more that we can pull on from the religious aspect in order to try to eradicate the cultural sort of influences. I would say we need more education for the parents, because what I find is it's always the children.
I was literally thinking as you said that, that I feel, and we see it here as well, that there is a handover of responsibility.
Yeah.
Yes, that's my child, but they're not practicing their Islam properly, so I'm going to hand them over to you to fix that problem.
Yeah.
We have it here. So we teach martial arts.
Yeah.
My husband loves working with the youth, the teenagers, the children. Like, he's able to strike this amazing balance of respect
Mashallah.
and fun.
Yeah.
Mashallah.
Yeah.
I can't do what he does. Like, he's incredible at that, mashallah.
Mashallah.
But he has parents coming to him. He has fathers coming to him saying, can you fix my son?
Yeah.
Using these words, can you fix my son? He's not been listening at school, or he's not listening at home, or he lashed out at his mum. And my husband's like, I'm not here to fix your son. I'm here to give your son a safe space where he can learn who he is,
Yes.
where he can believe in himself, where he can understand his own potential. But if your son is misbehaving, you need to get to the bottom of why that is happening.
Yeah.
Because it's not because he's coming here. Now, what he does do is he works very closely with parents, and he will say to the child, listen, if you're doing this at home, and especially if they've lashed out, then you're not allowed to come to the club. But there's this handover of responsibility. And my husband said a couple of times, he's asked fathers, he's like, I am not your son's father. You are. Do you think there's this handover of responsibility?
Absolutely. I mean, you see that within schools. You hear a lot of teachers. So my family has a large sort of teaching background. My mom's a teacher. So there definitely is that, well, they're in school now. They're your responsibility. And actually, if they behave a certain way, I expect you to fix that, right? Whereas actually, whether you send your children to school or you homeschool them, the home will always be the most important core element. And actually, you really have to step into your parental role. And that's not easy.
No.
It's not easy to try and find ways to, work out why are they behaving the way they do. And sometimes that means taking accountability for your own behavior, because maybe you've contributed to that, or the environment you've created has contributed to that. And that's not easy at all. And actually, it's just easier to pass over the responsibilities. You see this in madrasas as well. Well, you teach them the Islam bit, and, we'll just do not much at home, and actually that's your responsibility, but it isn't. Ultimately, it is our responsibility. And whilst that can feel really overburdening and heavy, it's also a very big privilege and gift.
I think denial is also a very dangerous part, because you say about schools, I know people who will say, well, the school has blamed my child for acting like this. But I know it wasn't his fault, it was somebody else's fault. Or it wasn't her fault, it was somebody else's fault.
Yeah.
So acknowledging that your child is not perfect.
Yeah.
And you're not here to make them perfect.
See, that's really interesting, because I did this. And I feel like the reason why we do this as parents is because we believe that our children are a complete reflection of us. So their behavior is a complete reflection. So if the child is going to school and then getting into trouble, I must be the worst parent in the world. It's a personal
attack on your parenting.
Exactly.
And it's interesting that you say that, because that takes it back to the time where you said that you realized that you were speaking how your mum would speak.
Yes.
And so there's that fear that continues through to adulthood then.
Absolutely.
And yet you're happy to put your child in a position that is vulnerable for them and make them feel uncomfortable, because nothing worse for a child than parent and teacher disagreeing on their behavior.
Yeah.
Not on the same page. I mean, there's so many dangers that come with that.
Absolutely.
What made you choose to then turn this into a business?
Okay. I always say that through my own struggles, through my own tests, it revealed my purpose. SubhanAllah.
Absolutely, SubhanAllah.
So the reason why I decided to turn it into a business is because I didn't want anyone to feel the way that I did. Mm-hmm. Because when I was looking for help, what I found was there wasn't anyone that was talking about the experiences that I had from a cultural perspective. There wasn't anyone that looked like me. Mm-hmm. And when you don't talk about these things, there's a lot of shame that gets buried within you, because you think you're the only one who's continuing to shout at your kids. You're the only one that feels like this. So the core of my business was, well, I experienced this, and I never want any other child to experience this. So let's change the narrative of essentially growing up in an ethnic household. And that starts with educating us as parents.
So you could have just gone off and gone to an organization or a company that's already doing some sort of parenting courses. You didn't. You chose to set something up for yourself, which is not an easy thing to do. What led to that decision?
That's a really interesting question. I think it boils back to who I am and what is my purpose. So ultimately, my purpose is I am a slave of Allah. I knew I had more to give. I knew that the experiences that I had, and I wasn't the only one who experienced those things. I knew there was something more to it. And I wanted to leave a legacy.
Mm-hmm. What does that legacy look like?
That legacy looks like the ripple effect of the education that I'm able to give to parents that changes, I'm just having goosebumps, every single household. And it means that, okay, sure, we won't eradicate every single thing because we're never going to be perfect parents. But it means that actually the next time somebody asks a child that comes from an ethnic or diverse household, you know, what was your experience? And they sit in a chair like this and they say, well, do you know what? It was loving. It was warm. And yeah, my mom lost her cool sometimes, but you know, I could speak to her about anything.
Beautiful. So beautiful. Have you had anybody try to criticize the fact that you are making money from trying to help people?
Oh yes, absolutely. SubhanAllah. It's do it fi sabilillah, you know, or why are you charging this much? And, you know, lots, completely, so many.
What are your thoughts on it?
My thoughts is I very much, before I started my business, I think I really suffered with this mindset myself. SubhanAllah.
Yeah.
So I understand where it comes from. However, investing, something that changed my life, is finding a mentor that I align with and that not only just talks the talk, but has walked the walk, you know?
Yes.
And then investing in myself. And I understand that not everybody understands that concept.
Because we've been conditioned.
Yes.
From the age of 4, 5.
Yeah.
To understand that we sell our time for money.
Yes.
And it's not about the results.
Yeah.
So most people can't get their head around the fact that they are paying for a specific result. And a good example of this is in my business mentorship. It's actually cheaper to work with me for 12 months than it is to work with me for 6 months. And people are like, I think you've put me on the wrong program. You've given me 12 months. I paid for the cheaper option. I'm like, yeah, because which is more beneficial to you? Me helping you get to your goal in 6 months or me helping you get to your goal in 12 months? I'm going to put more time into helping you get there in 6 months than what I'm going to put to help you get there in 12 months. They're like, oh. I'm like, once you can grasp the concept of a specific result,
yes,
then there's really no financial burden. If you're helping a parent build a beautiful relationship with their child, how long is that relationship likely to last?
Yeah.
A lifetime.
Absolutely.
Now, if you want to talk about cost per hour, we're talking pence.
Yeah.
But we're talking about the results.
Absolutely.
Of getting somewhere.
It's the transformation that we're talking about. And, you know, I always say to my clients that who you want to be and what type of mother you want to be, you are literally one decision away. And if someone had said this to me about 10 years ago, I would have been like, that's such a cliche thing to say. What do you mean? But it's the truth. Mm-hmm. You have that choice because Allah has given you that free will and that decision for you to make. And
choice is powerful.
Absolutely.
And that's why it's so important to be able to allow children to be able to learn how to make the right decision. Yeah. Not to be told what to do.
Yeah. Whether you're there or whether
boundaries.
You're not. Yeah, absolutely.
There are boundaries, of course. Have you faced any challenges in building your business to a point where it can be successful enough for you to say, no, this is what I do? Because I think a lot of people misinterpret or misunderstand that an online business is a real business.
Yeah.
They think that someone just makes a few videos. I mean, you were saying about your dad, that's a perfect example. But even like your own generation, a lot of people don't understand. I mean, just look at the setup in here. For this 1 hour that we're speaking for, there's hours and hours of preparation that goes into things. And people don't see behind the scenes. Did you face any challenges, I would say, or do you face any challenges in that business and its growth? And what that journey's been like for you?
I think something that's really interesting, when I was still heavily burdened down by what people think of me, it was that anybody who's trying to get onto social media or is making these videos is just trying to be an influencer. I think there really is that concept. SubhanAllah. And actually, it's not a real business because there's no bricks and mortar. You know, they're just making a few videos and that's what it is. So really, I think I really grappled with that quite a lot. And coming away from that, I would say the other block for me was asking for help. Yeah. Because being an eldest daughter of an ethnic household, it was, I can do everything by myself. I don't need to ask anyone for help. I've got this. Even if I'm really struggling, it's all right, I'll figure it out.
So I think that's a really common trait in entrepreneurs.
Yes.
Anyway, because the majority of people will quit when it gets hard. And it gets hard.
It gets really hard.
It gets hard. Yeah. But if you were used to always relying on other people, you probably would never have started in the first place.
That's true. That's absolutely true.
So it does take the mindset of, I can do this by myself, to get you started, to get off those starting blocks and to actually start with the growth. But if you want that to become a job replacing business and you want it to grow and you want to leave a legacy, you're then going to need to ask for help because you can't do everything by yourself.
Absolutely.
And there's nothing smart in trying to do everything by yourself.
No.
You need to find the people that are more skilled than you in the areas where you're weak to be able to delegate.
Yes.
And to be able to use your own strength.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are probably the key lessons that you would say that you've learnt along your business journey that you wish you'd known at the beginning?
You're not going to be good at everything, and that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're not a content creator. You are there with your skills that you have in your area of expertise. And it's okay that someone else is better at that than you, and allow them, be open to receiving that help.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Number 2 is not everyone is going to understand your journey, and that's okay. And so what if they say things directly or indirectly and you hear it? Your journey is not for everyone to understand. And I think the third thing for me is everything that you thought you weren't, you absolutely are.
Yeah. And there's usually evidence of that. You've just never looked at it.
Absolutely, yeah.
So interesting. I think it's interesting as well that most people have this imposter syndrome.
Yes. Yep.
And this thought of, well, why will anyone listen to me, or why will anyone want to come to me when there's other people out there that are better than me? Why are they better than you? They're better than you because they started. They're ahead of you. That's the only reason. Because we're all equal in terms of ability. We may all have different strengths and different ways of doing things, but you do need to just start. And that's always, whether that is improving your parenting skills, starting a business, whatever it is, the sooner you start, the better you'll become.
Yes.
And the other thing I think people often presume when they look at people online is, I don't know how that person's got that amount of motivation.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how they stay motivated. Let me tell you, motivation comes last. I don't wake up every morning feeling like, yeah, I'm motivated for the whole day ahead.
Yeah.
You start, the more you practice, the better you get. The better you get, the more results you see. The more results you see, the more motivated you then become.
Absolutely.
To be like, I'm actually helping people and this is my job.
Absolutely.
It is an honor, but it's definitely hard work. And I think people don't realize quite how much energy and time goes into everything that you're doing.
Oh, for sure. And we were speaking about, in the online world, it's really easy to see that, well, she just has it easy and there must be something she has that I don't have. And that's definitely not the case. And I always take it back to, well, what's your why? What is the reason why you started up all of this? And it has to be so strong enough for you to get through those days where you're like, well, I really don't want to do this. I really don't want to get up and do this. But actually your why is beyond this world, and your why is for the future generations, and it's not anything else.
So I have a task that I get all of my mentees to do at the beginning of their business journey, and it's identifying their why.
Amazing.
And then with that why, they have to revisit it. Anytime they come to me and say, oh, do you know, it's getting a bit tricky. I'm finding I'll pull out that why. Decide how much you want this, because it's just a matter of priorities. Everybody has the same 24 hours in a day. What are your priorities? Once you identify your priorities, you can win. And there's 3 simple steps that I say for anybody to be able to win. First is you have to set an intention. What you're doing and why you're doing it. Secondly, you then make dua. Allah, if this is good for me, make it easy for me. If this is bad for me, keep it far from me. And third, you take action. Now that you've taken action, whether it worked out or didn't work out, it's a win. Because Allah wanted it that way for you. But you can't have one of those points or 2 of those points without all 3 being there in action. What are your goals now from here? What are your goals with your business and what you're doing?
At the moment, we're focusing on scaling. So alhamdulillah, we social media is something that we've grappled with for about 5-6 years now, alhamdulillah. And when COVID hit, my goals before COVID hit was to really scale in person. So nationwide events and really just get ourselves out there. However, post-COVID, alhamdulillah, I think that's one of our main goals. And also, I can't do this alone. So it's to build a team of culturally responsive coaches who can also go out there and help parents, because ultimately, if you want to grow, you're never going to do it alone. So those are my main 2 goals at the moment, inshallah. Because
if your long-term goal is to leave a legacy,
yes,
the only way to do that is with growth.
Absolutely.
Is to spread that message even more. And what would you say your vision is of parenting? Let's say in the UK, because I think taking it worldwide is a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
Within the UK, what is your vision of how you would like to see parenting? What path does that look like, I guess? What does that look like? And what is your vision? Not just how you'd like it, but how do you see it developing?
I see open communication with parents and child. I think that's a number one value. But I also see, and this might be a bit of a controversial opinion, I also see parents stepping into their parental authority more.
Okay.
Because what I think what I hear and what I see, and I think I was definitely guilty of it, is a lot of parents kind of transferring over that responsibility and being scared of stepping into it themselves without sounding like their own parents.
Mm-hmm.
So which you can set limits and boundaries, but you can do that in a loving way without, oh my gosh, I sound like my mom.
Yeah.
But we have to step into that authority as a parent. And I don't want to sound doom and gloom, but I think given the world that we live in, it's very easy to just lose your children to society.
Very easy, especially with internet.
Oh, yeah.
Especially with internet. I think that's something that, I mean, I'm sure that's a whole separate conversation in itself. But parenting and babysitting through devices.
Oh, yes.
Is incredibly scary what they can end up having access to and be influenced by. I think having access to certain things is different to how influenced somebody becomes by something.
Yeah.
Because we're not trying to wrap anyone in cotton wool
so
that when they get out into the big wide world, they're like, whoa, what is this?
Yeah. And
how do I manage that?
That's interesting because I find that those are the two ways that parents are going about things. It's either completely removing that or just, it's part of the world now. What can we do? The free access. And that's why the open communication is so important. Because if children are exposed to those types of things, if you're then able to go and share it, it allows room for critical thinking and choices.
Amazing. You spoke about leaving a legacy. How do you see that evolving?
I see that parents know how to lovingly parent their child. And I know that sounds like such a basic thing, but I didn't know how to do that. The only way that I knew was through control and dominance.
So I guess actually understanding what love is.
Yeah.
And how love is shown.
Yes.
And that protection alone is not love.
No. Absolutely.
Because just saying how to show love, everybody shows love in a completely different way.
Yeah. Going back to the beginning of the conversation, we spoke about our parents showing love in a certain way, be it protective love or tough love or whatever you want to call it. So knowing how to show love and unpacking what love actually means. What does it mean? Mm-hmm. Because under the umbrella term of, well, I love you, that's why I'm doing this, that could mean so many things. Well, I'm shouting at you and I'm hitting you because I love you and I want to protect you is clearly didn't work and doesn't work. So understanding what love means for yourself first, and maybe even coming to terms with the fact that I didn't feel loved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What would you say your ideal future looks like for your own children?
Oh, that's a big question. SubhanAllah. Okay. Open communication. They are going to make their decisions. Whether or not I agree with them, whatever choices they make, they're not mine to make. I think that's something that I fully understood, that they are their own separate human beings. And again, I'm going to say it sounds like the most basic thing. You know that they are not you and you are not them. But coming from a cultural background, that separation isn't there. So for me, it looks like they're their own human beings. They may make choices that I don't agree with. However, my support will always be there. My love will always be there regardless. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't shun them or I wouldn't, criticize them. Well, I'd like to hope I wouldn't. So open communication regardless. I think that for me, that's like the number one thing, inshallah.
And what message do you have for the woman that sat at home on the sofa right now, listening to this, thinking, maybe she's talking about me, but is petrified of what that journey potentially looks like?
Something I wish that someone told me was, you can be everything that you've never received. You can be that. Just because you haven't received it and it wasn't given to you, you can become that. Is it going to take a journey and a half? Sure. But isn't that worth it for yourself, let alone for your children?
It was really interesting. I heard, I can't remember who the podcast was with. I think it was a Diary of the CEO podcast. And they were basically speaking about quite often the decisions we make in life and what we give out most to other people is what we needed most ourselves.
Yes. Oh, that's so true. SubhanAllah. That's so true. I think I definitely see that in my teenage years. I was the one giving out advice and the one everybody would turn to and had so much love to give. And I wasn't giving that to myself because I didn't know how to. And I had to learn how to do that. And because whatever is inside you is what essentially is going to come out, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Thank you for having me on.
It's
been a beautiful conversation. And to anyone that's just listening and this just feels very heavy, just know that I have been where you are. And so many of my clients have been where you are. And all it takes is just one decision to firstly give yourself the permission to question and just know that actually something that comes up a lot is you're not blaming your parents.
No.
And how about if we reframe that and actually you are giving them the voice that they never had?
Beautiful. Beautiful. And I think something I always like to remind people as well is just take things step by step.
Yeah.
You don't need to see the whole staircase. Just take the first step, but take it.
Yes.
You don't need to just stay in what feels comfortable because it's all you know.
Yeah.
There's a lot more out there. And if you constantly work on improving yourself first,
Yes.
forget about building a business or building a relationship with your children or any of that stuff. Just focus on who you really would like to be, who you really are, then everything else will come organically after that.
Absolutely. And that can feel scary, but it's the most liberating thing. Any woman, and I remind myself, because Allahumma barik, I look up to so many inspirational women like yourself, but I ask myself that question, what mountain or how many mountains did she have to climb and unearth within herself to become and be who she is today?
Yeah.
And that's a journey that you will, inshallah, want to embark on as well.
Absolutely. It's been an absolute pleasure. Jazakallah khair for coming. Thank you for your time. And if people want to find you, where would they find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Black and Brown Parenting. Inshallah, it's the main place.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.